Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a senior premier field engineer specializing in system center technologies. Today's discussion will be a post-mortem analysis of a problem that I worked with one of my customers, specifically a problem dealing with acquiring machine variables during operating system deployment. So, why am I doing this? This video? Well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, the obvious one is if someone out there is having the same problem that I did working through this process, or understanding why machine variable acquisition is failing, then this will give you a decent roadmap as to how to troubleshoot that. Right. The other is even if you're not really concerned about machine variables in OSD, but you just kind of want to understand how the process of OSD works in acquiring different pieces as we go through, then this gives some insight. And more than that, the troubleshooting techniques that I use along the way in this video are applicable generally to working with ConfigMgr and trying to reverse engineer how processes work and so on. Right? So that's why it should be useful just in learning, how to troubleshoot, or seeing some of the tools and how to use them. So let me first set the scenario, then we'll go into actually walking through it. So in my customer's environment, they called me and said, "Hey, I have a problem. My process is to set up machine variables that are then used to drive the imaging process through my task sequence, and that all works great, except right now it's not." Right, and this had actually happened before. So the first time this happened, it was because the scripting that they were using to inject these machine variables in 2007, ConfigMgr 2007, was acting against the direct primary site. They tried to take that forward in 2012 and also act against the direct primary site. And what we learned is you actually need to do that against the CAS in a hierarchy, and then everything just started working. Well, this problem now has come back. So one of the first things we looked at, in jumping ahead a little bit, is to find out, were the variables that they were adding actually in the table where they should be. So in the first example, where they were trying to inject directly at the primary, it wasn't moving around, it wasn't replicating around, the machine variables weren't there. Right? So the map_machine variables table is where those variables should be listed. So we looked, and in fact they were there. So now we're left with a situation of trying to understand what exactly was going on, right? What we needed, or what was happening to cause those machine variables not to be present, right? They were there in the table, map_machine variables, so they had made it down from the CAS to the child primary. So now what else could be going wrong? To give a specific look at what that looked like in the customer environment, this is a snippet directly from their log. I've eliminated a lot of lines just to make it readable here. But here you see at the very beginning that we're going through, and as a part of beginning the imaging process, we're going to retrieve all the different policy assignments. That's normal, right? Whenever the machine first comes online, we have to figure out what task sequences, what variables, what all different pieces are actually assigned to this machine, so we can evaluate through them and find out what to do in the imaging process. So you see the header. I'll show this to you in my lab in just a minute, the more verbose section here, but I've, again, edited it for brevity. We're retrieving policy assignments. We start processing the first policy assignment. I delete a lot of lines, and then we finish processing the last policy assignment. At the end of the day, we process through 179 of them, right? So a pretty substantial section here. Then from there, we start going through item by item until finally we reach the portion of the log that we're looking for, where we're looking for variables. Now, there's two types of variables in OSD. There's machine variables, there's collection variables. Well, and then there's task sequence variables too, but that's different. So the collection variable process I show you here just to show the difference, right? So we start looking, retrieve collection variable policy, which means we're looking at all the policy that we just retrieved to find out if any of those policy items contain collection variables. And then we immediately start to download this policy body, which means that we did find one that included collection variables. We start preparing it. Ultimately, we do some processing, and at the end of the day, we report we found 3 collection variables. Okay, all good, right? Again, I eliminated several lines there, but you can see all good. Well, then the next thing we do is we go check for machine variable policy. In the very, very next line, I put the backslash in. That's not supposed to be there. Either way, found 0 machine variable. So what this line says, if there were any policy that talked about machine variable, you would see, just like here, starting to download policy for it. In fact, you'll see in my lab where it's working that, in fact, when we check for machine variable policy, we do start to download it. But in our case, the customer's log, we found 0 machine variables. So what does that mean? What that means is, for some reason, we're either not retrieving the policy correctly, or we're not preparing the policy correctly, right? Because again, we do see the machine variables in the database. We know that they're there. So what that means to me, or meant to me as I went through this, is I needed to start reverse engineering the process to figure out exactly where the problem was. Okay, so in order to troubleshoot, you kind of have to look at it two ways. Either it's going to be a problem that happens from the imaging system to the management point database, or it's going to be a problem that happens from the administrative console to the database. So let's start on the first side. So we know that in ConfigMgr, the client, pretty much everything the client does, it does by talking to the management point. It doesn't talk to the database directly. It doesn't talk to the site directly. It talks to the management point. Does that to retrieve policy, does that to send up status messages, does that to send up inventory, discovery data, everything, right? So it's a decent avenue to start to troubleshoot, to look at the processing of machine variables from the client or from the imaging system to the management point, to the database, find out what exactly is happening, right? And see if there's any clues as to what might be going wrong. Right? The other side, assuming we don't find anything in that path, is to process through from the administrative console to the database. That's going to be the other end of the loop, and we should find something in one of the two different places. So also, in terms of troubleshooting, we have several tools that we can bring to bear. Certainly the logs in ConfigMgr are very helpful, and that's something we will spend time in, and I'll walk through a little bit. But there's other tools as well that you're going to see me use, because the logs aren't or don't provide a complete enough picture in this case to see the process. So one of the tools that I'm going to use a couple of times is SQL Profiler. So SQL Profiler, a really good extra tool to allow you additional insight to augment what the logs are telling us, right? When we get to the console side, then I'm going to have the ability to look in things like SMS provider log and different things. Again, SQL Profiler will come into play. Okay. One of the things also, just to comment on here, when you are in a reverse engineering scenario, having the logs on the most verbose level that you can is important. For the management point logs, it's critical. There are some management point logs that don't even get written unless you have verbose and debug logging turned on. There's some logs that are there, but they don't have useful information in them unless verbose and debug logging is turned on. So, for example, the MP_location log is one that is there just with standard logging, but doesn't have anything useful. If you turn on debug and verbose logging, then now it becomes very useful for tracing the content acquisition or content location kind of things, right? So that's just one example. So that said, let's walk through reverse engineering this process, and the rest of the time we'll spend in my lab. So let me pull my lab in. All right, there we are. So just to show you, I have a couple of bare metal machines that I've defined, imported, right, that I use to just put on machine variables. Both of these actually have machine variables defined. Okay, they don't have any collection variables, just machine variables is all I care about here. And then this one also has machine variables. I can't remember which one is which. It doesn't matter. All I care is to boot. Now, to troubleshoot this process, what I'm going to do is boot a blank machine, a bare metal machine, into WinPE, and then allow a section of that processing to go through, and then I'll have what I need in my log. So what I want to do to line up all of the things I need to look at is I want to get my bare metal machine started. So let me do that. Where are we? blank. That's what I care about. Okay, this one is one that I was looking at already, so let me go ahead and turn it off, and then I'll reboot it. Okay, cool. And I do, by the way, have verbose and debug logging turned on my management point already, so I won't have to double check that. All right, so that's going to boot. I'm not going to pixie boot it. I'm just going to CD boot it. Again, the way in this scenario, the boot method doesn't matter. The ultimate desire we have is to get into Windows PE, and whether that be through pixie boot, whether that be through CD boot, doesn't matter, because once we're in PE is when the variable acquisition process begins. So that's what we're doing now. Now, I'm going to go ahead and open up the command prompt, and that way I'm ready, right? So the actual section of variable acquisition will happen when I click next. I'm not going to click next yet because I need to line a couple of other things up. So the logs are going to process on the management point in the background. I don't need to do anything right now because, again, if I had not set up verbose and debug logging, I need to make sure that's on before I take the next step. But I've already done that. So the next thing I'm going to do is go to my SQL server and set up SQL Profiler. Now, one thing just to provide some insight into why I'm kind of doing this. Now, you could have had SQL Profiler running the entire time, right? I just typed in Profiler, it's launching. I could have Profiler running. I could collect 20 minutes worth of Profiler data. To me, it makes it more difficult to sort through all of that information. It really isn't, right? If you keep track of the timestamps, you can line everything up by timestamp and go directly to that section. For me, I want to see as little logging as I can around the exact time frame that I know something's happening. So in my mind, it just is easier to hone in on it. So whatever's comfortable for you, but that works for me. So I'm going to go ahead and set up a new trace and connect to the instance that has my primary site on it. Right, that's where the client is. And now I'm going to do a couple of edits to my trace just to make it more readable. So I don't care about audits. I don't care at all. I don't need to see batch started and batch complete, just batch complete. And the other thing is, I want to, this database instance has a couple of, or this database engine instance has several databases on it. So I don't want to see all of the data for those databases. I just want to see the database that I care about, which in this case is CM_PS1. Okay, good enough. So I'm ready. So, and by the way, when I first went through this, I didn't use SQL Profiler. I tried to just use the logs, right? Most of the time, the logs will have the information in them that you need to kind of get a sense of the problem. In this case, I needed to augment a bit with Profiler. So up to you whether you want to do it all at the same time and collect all the data you could possibly need, or if you want to step through it, that doesn't matter. The other thing about this too, trying to do this in a customer environment can be a bit of a challenge. Their environment is busy. You know, it has a lot of activity in the logs that can make it harder to track down, especially when we get to the other side, looking at the SMS Prov log. That is a very difficult one to look at in many customer environments. It's so busy. So going through this process in my lab was very important for me to understand it, because my lab is not as busy as a customer environment. I can see exactly what's going on, and then I can apply that over to a customer environment. Right? Okay. So I'm ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and click Run. And what I'm going to immediately do is pause this thing, right? Because I don't care about the clutter at the beginning. So what I want to know is exactly what happens in a very finite period of time after I click Go. So I'm going to start this again. I'm going to go back over to my VM and hit Next. And this will fail because I don't have good task sequences waiting for this thing. But again, I don't really care, because the piece that I care about is happening right now. I'm going out and trying to acquire variables, and that just failed. Right? So I'm going to stop that, and I should have everything I need in this trace. So let's go look at exactly what happened. So I'm going to start with my system here. So I'm going to go find my SMSTS log. Okay, good enough. And I'm just going to go here at the top. I'm going to scroll down a bit. I'll maximize it. I'll scroll down a bit. And what we're looking for is the section where we start to pull policy. that long section I edited in the customer log snip I have, and here it is. So we're retrieving policy assignments, and then here we go. We're processing through all the different ones, and you see all the ones listed. I only have 48. The customer had 140 plus, right? So there's a lot there. So now I'm just going to go through and try to find the section that we care about where we're looking at variables. I'm going to go find collection first. Did I type that right? Let's see. Let me just look for collection. There we go. So here we're trying to retrieve collection variables, and in this case I don't have any. So just like we saw in the customer's log for machine variables, we report 0. Well, that doesn't surprise me. I know that's okay in my lab. It doesn't bother me. I don't have any collection variables. We're doing exactly what I would expect. Then we go down and we retrieve machine variables. And you notice then the very first thing we do is we start downloading and working on a policy body because we found it. So what does that mean? The fact that we start working on a policy body, what does that mean? What that means is that you can infer that machine variables actually come down to the system as a part of policy from the management point, right? So taking that to the next level, in the database we have a series of tables that are responsible for storing policy, right? One of them is called the policies table, strangely enough. So we might actually end up going to those tables, in fact we will, to look and see what the policy structure looks like, see what, if anything, might be wrong. But in my case, I have policy, it's good to go, and don't have to worry about it, but still we can use this good scenario to backtrace to exactly what happened, right? So I start processing down my machine variable. If I scroll down a bit, you'll see, in fact let me search because I'm not seeing it right now. There we go. So found one machine variable. So in this little section right here, between here and here, is where we recognize we do have a policy that reflects machine variables. We're going to open it, download it, process it through, and successfully we found one machine variable. So in my lab it works, right? So how do I backtrace this? Well, again, timestamp always is our friend. So if we look, the timestamp is around 10:20:25 that we're doing this. So knowing this, now I can go to my management point logs 10:20:25 and see what happened, right? So let me go to my site server. Actually, let me just go to my primary site and look at the logs. Don't even need to look at the site server directly, just the logs directory. And since I know the time frame, I'm just going to sort by date modified. And what I care about is any of the logs that start with MP underscore at that time frame. Oops, sorry, I went to the wrong place. I went into the traditional ConfigMgr logs folder. I need to go into the CM or CCM logs folder. Very good. All right, now let me sort by date modified. Again, I know that what I care about happened at around 10:20-ish time frame on today, so which is 2:10. So we look around. Okay, I'm not seeing any MP underscore logs, but that's not really a big deal. One thing I've seen before, and I see here, is logs sometimes don't update their timestamp even though they were active. So be aware of that, right? If you just sort by timestamp, but you don't, and you don't see anything, doesn't mean anything, or something's not happening or hasn't happened. In this case, I know which log to go to. I care about the MP underscore logs. So since I don't see anything by timestamp, I'm just going to sort alphabetically, and I'll go down to the MP underscore logs. There's a bunch of them here. If you didn't know which one to look at, you could sort through each one of them and find out which ones are active at the time frame that you care about. In my case, I know I'm pulling policy, so a good logical place to start is MP underscore policy. So let's open up the current one and check our timestamps. And you'll see right here, just like I said, we are actually writing to this log at the time frame that we talked about, but for whatever reason, the timestamp hasn't updated until we close the log, and now it has, right? So just bear that in mind, right? So what are we doing in this log? Well, so let's go up to the time frame at which we were active, right around 10/20/24, whatever that was. Let me go back to my client, my imaging system, and just make sure. It's back on blank. So 10/20/25-ish, right around there. Okay, so 20/24 is a decent time, and there's a bit of churn that goes on around here. So let me go on up to the top of the processing loop. There we go. So you get a natural break. And again, why is it hard to troubleshoot this in a customer environment? Because this log will be busy all the time, right? In a customer environment. A lot of machines are out there pulling policy. Let me just look at this one more time. A lot of machines are out there pulling policy. 10/20/25. Okay, I went to the bottom again. Sorry. Let me pause this. That's another little trick. These logs will update automatically, and if you forget to pause them, you can just jump ahead to the wrong place. Let me go up to the top of the processing loop. So yeah, this log would be busy all the time. All the machines in a customer environment would be hitting the management point, pulling policy. This log would be getting updated. So it could be difficult to find. It could wrap quickly, all those kinds of things. So almost there. Come on. Okay, good enough. So right around here, we start to process policy. And we can tell that this is a OSD policy, and we're requesting assignments. Okay, we can look in here and look at our client GUID if we want to and prove this is the client that's asking for it. In my case, it is. If you wanted to prove that, you could come into the site server here and look at the GUID on that machine. So, for example, I believe it's this one. Let's see. Yeah, right here. So this is the GUID. It matches, so I know it's the right machine. All right, and then we're going through and processing policy. That's all I really need to see, but you can look at a lot of the detail. You can go line by line and see exactly what's going on. And what you're looking for at this level is to find out okay, we're asking for policy, and we know we're asking for policy against the database, but how exactly are we asking for policy? What I mean by that is, in order to request data from the database, there has to be some mechanism to do that. Either it's going to be a SQL query, it's going to be a stored procedure, something of that nature. So you would expect maybe to see a reference to a stored procedure here, and or a SQL query. And looking through this, you don't see anything, right? You certainly see asking for policy assignment IDs and on, right? I'm going to jump ahead. I actually know where we're going, so I'm going to jump ahead and look for this. There's nothing in here, right? The stored procedure we're ultimately going to get to is MP_, right? Something. So since I need to know, since again our scenario is we know the machine variables are in the database, but we also know our machine is not getting policy for those variables, I'm trying to figure out where's that policy coming from. What is the mechanism asking for that policy, so maybe I can go troubleshoot that and see where it's broken. Right? My lab works, so it's a good opportunity to go see what did we call to get this policy and how did it work. So that's where SQL Profiler comes in. I know something happened. I don't know what it was. I know it had to go against the database. So around this time frame in SQL Profiler, what actually happened? So if we go into SQL Profiler and go over to our timestamp, and search around. Okay, around 10/20/24. And one thing about SQL Profiler, you can certainly search for things in here, but if you are, just bear in mind that SQL Profiler is case sensitive. Okay. So, all right, 10/20/24, right around here. So let's just come over and look through and start scanning what we're doing. So we're running through, looking at some different select statements, certainly that we can sift through. What we're looking for, though, is to find out anything that might be referencing our machine in question, and specifically policy. So here's something interesting: MP_get client ID from MAC address. Well, in my case, whenever I imported this client machine, I just put in all zeros, so it's easy enough to find, right? So this looks like we're starting to work on our machine, but it has nothing about policy. Here's another get machine identity from GUID, and in fact, this is not the GUID that we care about, so this is probably not related. It's just noise. Keep on going down. Here's some more SQL statements. Okay. You can actually also see the application name that's calling for it. So this is SQL replication going on, or ConfigMgr SQL replication. So we're going on down, looking for things. We can just spin on down past the ConfigMgr SQL replication piece. Okay, here's maybe an entry that looks interesting. Here, look, MP get machine policy assignments. And look here, if we look at the GUID, it is the exact one that matches our machine, right? So embedded in all of this replication information, we see this. So you can sort by application name. You can, again, look by timestamp. You can look through all this. There's going to be some clutter in this. You could filter it even more if you wanted to, but because it's my lab and it's not that noisy, I can work through it line by line. You see the timestamp actually lines up. So what we know now is we were looking for policy. We saw earlier that we were looking for the machine by MAC address, and then here we see the machine by GUID, and we see that we're asking for policy assignments. So this has to be the place that we're actually getting those assignments and having them returned to the client. So that's interesting. What is this stored procedure actually doing? So let's go find it. MP _get machine policy assignments. If we pop up in the database and go down to stored procedures, okay, MP _get policy assignments. Scroll on down quicker. There we are. I passed them. Yeah. There we are. Almost. There we are. MP _get policy. Where is it? Oh, I think I know what I'm looking at. I get tripped up by this all the time, if it's what I think it is. Let's see. Nope, this is the right one. Okay, this, I must just have missed it. Let me check it. Hang on. Oh, that's what I'm messing up with. You get machine policy assignments. All right, let me go back down there to the EMS, MP _ get machine policy assignments. LM here. There's our store procedure. Okay, good. So one of the things that I get tripped up on all the time when I look at the database is I tend to look at the CAS database, but the CAS doesn't support clients. So some of the things that you would need for client support, like offer manager and different things, aren't at the CAS. So anyway, I'm looking at the right database. I just was missing a word in there, get machine policy assignments. Now, so one word of caution here. Obviously, you know, we are all support engineers working for Microsoft, and that's all goodness. But working in the database is something to do with caution. There's times, certainly, like this, where we need to go into the database, we need to understand it, be able to reverse engineer it, all of that kind of thing. But that's, again, a reason why I'm working in my lab. I would far rather work in the database in my lab, get an understanding, than I would try to do it in a customer environment. And if I'm going to ultimately suggest that the customer change something in the database, which I'm not here, but if I were, I definitely would want to do that in my lab and vet it out and make sure that things are good before trying to take it over to the production environment. And even in the production environment, I would want to make sure I had a good backup. That's something I could put back in place in case there's an unanticipated problem. All right, so what I want to do is, first of all, I can test run this stored procedure. There's no reason I can't. In my lab, I can run it, no problem. So here, let me make sure that I'm actually connected to my right database. Hang on a second. This is still connected to another one. Let me close this down. No. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a new query, and this time it should be connected to the right one. Good enough. So I'm going to run this stored procedure. Just to see. Since I see the logs running it, I'm curious. I'm going to run it and see what happens. And in fact, what I get back is a list of policy assignment IDs, various different information. So if I look at this table, I want to see, first of all, what time was the last update time this policy was was hit, right? That could be relevant. So if I look around, everything looks pretty similar as far as timestamp. So it doesn't lead me anywhere. But if this were a policy that had just been updated recently and I had just added machine variables recently, it might give me a place to go. Right? Also, if I scroll around, I can see some more details about it. Right? Just looking for anything. In this case, I'm kind of stuck. I don't really see anything interesting in here. So another thing that I can do is I can go and open up this stored procedure. So let me go do that. So if I right-click on the stored procedure, let's see, get policy machine ID. There it is. So I can just click on modify, and that will pull this open. So this is a decent length stored procedure. It's not horribly complex, but not one I want to sift through line by line. So I'll just take you to the line that's of interest. Actually, let me take you through a couple of lines. So notice the description, first of all, stored procedure to get machine policy delta policy assignments. That's exactly what we're after, right? So if we go through this, I'll search here. We are interested in learning where our policy assignments come from. Just looking at the data that was returned from the stored procedure doesn't help us much, right? We don't know what policy is supposed to be set for machine policy, machine variable policy. We can't look at the policy body. It's an encrypted mass of data. We could, right, if we were to need to go to that level. Well, there are ways to do it, but here, without debugging, without some unencryption tools or whatever, it's not possible. But what I do know is I can use this stored procedure, hopefully, to continue to back into exactly what we're doing. So policy assignment is definitely something we're looking at, and notice we see a table here called policy assignment. Well, that is a relevant table, right? So let's go look at that table. Let me go back over here, and I'll look at the policy assignment table. So remember, policies can come from multiple sources. We know by looking at our machine, let me call your attention back to that, by looking at our imaging machine, we see the kind of policy that maybe we should expect, because again, this machine that I'm using works. Okay, so just to call your attention back, we found one machine variable. Let's look back up. Right here, we're downloading policy body. Well, we get a reference to what that policy body is. Well, that's interesting. Let's see if it correlates. Okay. So if we go back to our database and look at policy assignments and scroll down, oops, scrolling down in the wrong place. Scroll down, let me go near the bottom. Scroll on up, right? Scroll on up here. And interesting, look here. So we see some policy ID that is called this exact name coming from site PS1. So just to show you again, let me correlate the two. If we, oops, sorry, my bad. All right, so just to correlate the two, so I have the policy ID kind of in this window, and let's look, let me see if I can shrink this down enough. Right, the policy ID right here, it's the exact same number, right? So there looks to be something in common here. Maybe I'm onto something. All right, so let's keep going. So in the policy assignments table, right, this is where the different policy assignments are doled out to, are recorded for the various systems. I can also see, well, I can see more information here. Let me see if I can scroll across. Right, whether the policy assignment is active or not. So this might be a good place to stop, and we certainly checked here. You know, is the policy tombstoned, meaning that it was created, but now it's not, and we want to avoid delivering it. So that's row 143. We want to avoid delivering it because it is no longer valid. So if you look over row 143, mine is not tombstone. You know, it could be that the customer environment, it was tombstone. So this is a great place to start. Find out, is the policy actually created? or is it not? And if it is created, is it tombstoned or is it not? In our case, there was no policy here, right? So we had to keep going. So in my case, again, it just is another cog in the wheel to help me work through this. So from here, if we have a table here that lists the policies and the policy assignment ID, then we have the policy ID corresponding, right? So this is the policy assignment table, has a policy assignment ID. It references a policy ID. Well, that would lead one to believe there's probably another table out there somewhere that lists the policy ID. And let's just check, and if we look in the database, we see one that says policy in the name. So we can go take the next leap and go to that table and look and see if we have anything there. So scrolling on down, we're looking for a policy ID that ends in F. Here it is, right? Same one. So if we scroll around here, we can see more detail. I can scroll through the database, make sure that there's no other entry that might be duplicated or look the same or anything like that, and I don't see any. Right? I can scroll around, look to see when it was last updated, version matches, and different things. But if you search through this, while it's got good information in it, you quickly realize that you're kind of stuck. Right? You don't really know where else to go to backtrace this through to where this policy was actually created. So either we're at the end, we don't have anywhere else to go, or we have another step in the process, right? So trying to figure that out, again, I still don't know. I mean, I see the policy, I know it was created. I still don't know how it was created, where it was created, right? And so I'm going to look around a little bit more. And let me just again pause and say here. I mean, some of this, I don't discount that this would be have a level of difficulty. It had a level of difficulty for me. Knowing all the tables that were out there, I had a decent command of a lot of the tables already. If you have zero command of the tables, it will take longer. Again, one of the reasons that I'm doing this video to help show you some of the strategies, some of the ways to sort through it, different things, right? So in this case, I had a good idea that this kind of wasn't the end of the road. I could go over and start to work on the console down side, and I probably would have ended up at the same place, realizing that this wasn't the end of the road. But in my case, I wanted to keep looking. So one other potential source of information for me is I know that in the database, we're a relational database. There are tables that depend on various tables, and then this one might have a dependency on other tables, right? There's all sorts of linkages in the database. So one other place that I thought, hey, I might can try to look here to get more information is to view the dependencies that are in place between this table and other tables. So first, the default one is to list out any objects that actually depend on this table. Oops, I picked the wrong one. Stand by. That is actually the stored procedures. So the table that I want is this one. Okay. So let me go up to the tables instead of the stored procedures section. Collapse that down and go to the tables. So I want policies. Policies. There we are, right here. Okay. So now, if I look at dependencies on this table, you'll see a different list. Take a second to pull out all of the tables, but useful information. I mean, especially if you're trying to learn the database and how different things impact others, this is a great way to start to dig a little bit and figure out what all is there. Okay. So again, what I'm looking for is anything that would kind of point me in the direction of machine variables. And as I scroll down the list, lo and behold, right here, MEP_machine policies. Well, this looks like a gold mine, right? Because why? I'm looking for policies for the machine, and I know that the machine policy contains variables, and I know that MEP is actually a table that contains our variables. So remember, when I talked at the beginning, I said I jumped ahead of it. MEP_machine variables is where we look to verify the variables are even there. Well, in the MEP format, it kind of stands to reason maybe the machine policies table would contain some sort of information about the policy related to those variables. All right, so let's trace this down. So let's go to the mep_machine policies table. All right, so here I have mep_machine policies. Let's look at that. Okay, execute. Well, interesting. Okay, so here I have the or this exact same format. It's telling me, a little bit of encrypted stuff here that doesn't matter. But what's interesting is I can tie this number directly to the system that I'm trying to image and see, is it the same one? So if I look in system_disk, which is our starting table for all the machines that are in the database, I'm looking for a number that ends in 231. Okay, so for 231, let's see, these are my bare metal machines. Oh, here's 231. So right away, I know that in this mep_machine policies table, I do have policy created for my machine that I'm trying to image. And it works in my lab. Again, that's the benefit of using a lab that actually works, that you can sift through some things and learn how it works, right? So, but I still am at a loss. So in my customer scenario, this table was blank. So now I've answered the question, why am I getting 0 machine variables back whenever I start through the imaging process? And that's why. I don't have any machine policy for variables. There's nothing in this table, right? So then the question is, why is there nothing in this table? Right? What actually puts stuff in this table? And to answer that, now we have to go to the other side of the fence. So basically, I've worked all the way from the imaging client all the way back through the management point, all the way into the database to realize that from the database down to the client, nothing is wrong. The imaging client is doing exactly what it should be because there is, in fact, no policy created here. There were certainly places in which we could have gone south in that part of the process from the imaging system to the database. The tombstone scenario, the MP_policy log, maybe not being able to retrieve or get connection to the database or whatever it is, right? But all that checks out. So now we have to go to the other side and find out from the console down to the database and policy creation what's wrong. So to do that, we'll go ahead and pull in my my lab and we'll go create another variable. So let me do that. So, okay, get that out of the way, pull that up. All right, so let's go into my site server. All right, so at this juncture, I'm done with my imaging machine. So I'm going to go into my site server here. Okay, and again, this is the CAS. I care about what's happening. I'll do the work from the CAS, but I ultimately care about what's happening at the primary site. So we'll look at logs from there as we go along. Now, let me first of all clear out the variables that are on these machines. Now, on this one specifically, that's what I'm going to worry about, right? And let that process through for a minute apply. So now that we're on the console side and we're interested in looking at the process from the console to the database to policy creation, we should be in familiar territory. More familiar certainly than working from the imaging system back to the database. Why? Because pretty much everything that you create in the console goes through a similar set of processing. What do I mean? So when you create an item, well, first of all, the console in almost every case does not connect to the database directly. It connects to the database through the SMS provider. So that's a consistent theme, whether you're adding machine variables or software deployments or software update deployments or DCM items, whatever it is, we're talking directly to the SMS provider, which then in turn inserts data to the database. So in this case, I'm going to assume that that same processing loop holds true. And whenever I add a machine variable, I'm going to first stop in the SMS provider and see what happens, right? If this all holds true, then what I would also, well, I'm jumping ahead. I'll wait. I'm going to show you the SMS provider, and then we'll talk about it more. So by now, it should have processed through enough to let me go ahead and make another addition. So I'm going to make an addition. Again, the SMS provider, a very, very busy component. On in most customers' environments, especially if there's multiple consoles attached, and not always easy to track down exactly what's going on. So one of the tricks that I like to use if I'm in a customer's environment, even in my lab sometimes, is wait until the top of a minute, or half of a minute, or whatever it is. So when I click OK, I know exactly what to expect as far as timing in these logs. Right? It's again, for me, it helps keep things on track, keep things predictable in what's going on. So when I click OK, we're going to talk to the SMS provider, and we're going to take some action. So 2, 1, and OK. Right? So that initiated some activity, I would think, in the SMS provider. So let me go over to my program files and then logs. All right. So again, I'm going to open this up knowing it's a very busy log. In most production environments, in my lab it's not. I'm just going to go ahead and pause this. Right? If you don't pause this in a customer's environment, you're just going to see this thing just roll through and you're going to lose the data. So, but I'm interested in the processing that happened at the top of the minute. So here we go, right around here. Right? So I see processing happen, in fact, in a finite period of time. What do we have? So here we see that we're putting an instance in SMS machine settings. Okay, so that doesn't really tell us a ton, except that we've added an instance to SMS machine settings. We can go look at it and see what that might look like, just again to complete the loop. Let's go check it out. On down, on down. Should have just pulled it down. Let's see. There we go. Getting close. There we go. Did we pass it? Yeah. So here's machine settings. I can look at that, and I can see any machine settings that are out there for my my ID, which is this one. I can show them off on it and see what's there. So interesting stuff. Not a ton there, right? But one thing I did notice is whenever I was going through this, there was another little WMI namespace here called machine variable. So I can look at it, and I don't see anything here. Well, that's interesting. So I kind of am at a dead end here, although I know that something happened, right? So the question is, what happened? Well, what I do know is if I follow this through, the way processing happens on most of these components, again, whether you are adding a new package, whether you're adding an application deployment, whether you're adding a variable to a machine, whether you're sending down a software update, or whatever it is, right? There's a certain amount of processing that happens and data added to the database as a result of what you do in the console. Then from there, there's additional processing that needs to happen, like maybe sending content down to a distribution point, or in this case, creating policy. In pretty much every case, there's policy that needs to be created as a result of whatever action you take in the console, especially when you're creating something new, modifying, whatever. So once you add the changed data to the database, we need to go additionally process it, right? Well, the way that works is there's a thread called the SMSDBmon that watches key tables for changes. In the case of packages, it will watch PKG notification and then do additional processing, wake up distribution manager, whatever. In the case of deployments, it watches offer manager table and does that. In the case of application deployment, as I showed in my video series on that, it watches the CI_configuration items and one other table I'm forgetting right now. Anyway, so since that's such a common processing piece, stands to reason that that's a good place to look for this. And so if we go to SMSDBmon, we can maybe see what additional processing was done and use that to continue our backtrace. Okay, so looking at dbmon, again, potentially a busy log in production. Then we can go again to the 11 o'clock time frame, because that was around the start of the processing loop, and see what we have. So notice right here, monitor keys, task, deleted, da-da-da. We're just doing some routine stuff, it looks like. Oh, I'm sorry. Yep, this is 11 o'clock, but it needs to be on the primary site, right? Because policy is only going to be prepared at the primary site. That's the only place that hosts clients. So let me go down there. Yep, good enough. All right, let's go to the SMSDBmon here. And still looking around the 11 o'clock time frame. All right, so here we are, 11 o'clock-ish, because we had to do replication, different things, right? We're resetting our tasks and looking at different things, right? So let me expand this a bit, blow it up. So around 10 o'clock here, so now we're down to 11. We're doing our routine tasks that we do on a schedule, and then looking to see what happened. Right? So notice here, we did see about a minute and almost 2 minutes past 11 o'clock, we see that there's an update on the map_machine extended properties table. There's an addition. Interesting. So what we just did in the console resulted in an addition being made to the machine extended properties table. So that gives us a place to go, right? And look at what happened. Well, now also notice that as a result of an entry in this table, there's a file that has been dropped over in, guess what, policyprovider.box called the name or the machine ID of our machine.mep. Interesting. So what it looks like is that we are following the exact procedure that many other components follow. We make an addition to the database. That is noticed by SMSDBmon. And SMSDBmon says, oh, there's something to do. There's additional processing that needs to happen. In this case, we need to create policy. So we're going to drop a notification file over into policyprovider.box to process that. Right? So let's take a look at both. Let's first of all go to the MEP tables and see what we can see as far as the extended properties that are out there. Okay, so let me pull this back up. So here we're going to start with the machine extended properties table and look at it, and we see, interesting, here's our 231, here's the time frame, 210, right? That's the date. And if we look at every single other date in this table, there is nothing else that was done except the one we just did against the machine that we just acted upon, right? And we see it was done at the CAS, so we know that was us. So we have something that we can look at. Now that we know the policy was added, well, we can go to the other related MEP tables and see, okay, was anything changed for the machine policies? Okay, execute that. Well, kind of hard to tell at this level. We don't know. What about variables? This is the table that we started with to know that actually the variables were in place in the customer environment. And we can see, in fact, for our machine, let me see here. Maybe I got the wrong one, but this definitely has machine variables, right? So we can see them, the machine variables are going to be in the map_machine variables table. That bothers me, but still, without digressing on that, it should absolutely have the variables in the machine variables table. I don't know what the difference is with the machine ID for now, but I know that should be correct. All right, so since we have information added to the machine extended properties table, we know that there's additional processing that has taken place. In fact, there's really no need to look at the other MEP_tables unless you just want to, right? The key piece of processing here is that we added something to the map_machine extended properties table, then we dropped a file over in policyprovider.box to do additional processing. So let's go see what happened in that additional processing that might be interesting here. So if we go now to policy provider log, we can look for that MEP file to be processed. Again, my lab is a great place to do that. because it's not noisy. In a customer's environment, there can be a lot of processing of policy going through, and I'm talking and I can't find the log. There it is. In my lab, it's pretty finite. There's only one policy change that happened. So let's go up and look at this. So again, around the top of the 11 o'clock time frame, 11:01-ish, something like that. Right, let's scroll up. So I know there was that MEP file added. I can look for it, or I can just go up to the top of the processing loop around here and then search for it. So I'm just going to search for it, look for MEP. Okay, and there it is, right? So MEP process change objects. I can see that I'm detecting changes for my exact machine, 231. And notice here, I'm processing the change that happened. The very thing I'm doing is looking at the machine extended properties, and then I'm modifying some different things and adding policy for the machine. So there we go. Policy provider adds the policy for the machine. So I've completed the loop. I know exactly what happens. Imaging machine to database. That all is understood. And now I know the processing from the console to policy creation in the database. Now the question is, now that I know what happened here, what actually might have gone wrong in the customer environment? So with this information, I can go through and trace that side with the customer. And in fact, I did. And in fact, there is, I do have the policy provider from the customer's environment. So let's trace that. So let's pull it in. So I've gone directly to the location. Again, the customer's log is a little bit busier, but you see in the customer's log, here we are. We're processing a new metering rule. The term metering rule here is weird. At least at first it threw me because I was thinking, oh, we're processing a metering rule. Well, no, we're not. We're processing for this machine ID, and we start to process it down, and we see again, hey, we're looking for any MEP changed objects, whatever we're looking through, and instead of actually creating policy, notice what we get. Machine variables are only supported for SMS clients and machine, right? I'm sorry. Machine variables are only supported for SMS client, and machine is not an SMS client. Well, that's interesting. So there's the difference, right? In the customer's case, we're not preparing policy, and we looked at any variable that we would change. Any variable we would do. Oh, and another piece of information in the scenario, the customer could create collection variables. Everything was fine. Machine variables didn't matter what we did. Every variable was ignored, and we would get an entry like this. Didn't matter if it was same machine object, different machine object, didn't matter, right? So here's the difference. We are, in fact, never getting policy created. Therefore, there's nothing in that policy tables. Therefore, it's absolutely expected that the imaging machine would never get policy because there's none there, right? So this is odd because this system, for sure, is a client of ConfigMgr. My system is exactly like this one, right? It's not labeled as an active client. It's not got the client software installed. Doesn't matter. That's fine in OSD. But for some reason, this is being considered not a client. So the question then becomes, why is this being considered not a client, right? So here we go back with Profiler to understand there's got to be something that is running against the database to tell us that we are a client or we're not, right? So let's go pull that out and look in my lab where we have things that are working and see what happens as a result of adding variables there, and then we can extrapolate. So I'll go back to SQL. Let me pull this out of the way for a minute. I'm eventually going to have to come back here, but I'm going to get rid of this. Good enough. Get rid of that. And then go back down to SQL here, and I'm going to go back to our friend Profiler. So I've not closed Profiler. I've just stopped it from our previous work. So now I'll go back and make sure and clear the trace window so I don't have any clutter. And now I'm going to go and add a new machine variable to my system and just see what processing takes place. So again here, I'm looking at the child site, which is fine. I'm just going to add it from the CAS. Oh, that's why. I must have added the machine variable incorrectly. I must have added it. What did I do? I was wondering why the machine variables were not listed in the table. Oh, that's why. That's dumb me. Okay, so it doesn't matter. The processing loop was the same. The reason, so I went back whenever I was looking at the database and I was like, oh, I don't know why it's not there. It should be, right? Well, that was just me being stupid. I deleted the variable, but I don't think I ever really added it back correctly. So, because the list is empty. Doesn't matter whether you're adding or deleting a variable, it's still going to have to adjust policy for us and show it accordingly. So in my case, what I bet, and let's just close that processing loop, is if I go to SQL, that I will see the policy in that table, but it will actually be tombstone. Let's see. So if I go to machine policies, execute that, then scroll to the right. No, I'm not going to see it at this level. Let's see, yeah, I'm not going to, oh, wait, here, policy assignments, that will show it to me. That'll show it to me. Or machine policy assignments, let's find it. So here it is in the log. This is the, I'm sorry, in the table. This is the machine policies, or policy assignment table. So before it wasn't tombstone, line 143. This time it is. So that was my bad. I just didn't add the machine variable back. Anyway, so I will go add it again, and we'll capture that process through Profiler, and we'll actually see that the policy is there now. So let me go do that. All right, so I'm going to get ready to capture. Let me get ready to add a variable. So I'm going to go in here, go to variables, new one, so I'll call this test, or var1, whatever, test, okay. And then right before I hit OK, I'm going to start my my trace. Again, this is focused. The trace is focused on my child site. Hit OK, and that should work. I'm just going to go and wait a couple of minutes here and make sure that it's in there. Again, what I'm going to do is line up the policy provider log and the trace, and I should be able to find at that exact time something that happened in the trace that kind of gives us a clue as to the transaction, right? So just waiting for a minute, and the key is going to be waiting for the policy provider log to show that we have activity. So let's go look at it. So I'll search up for MEP. Okay, so I just saw it come in, and we see we're acting on the machine. Here's the policy. I've stopped my trace when I saw it come in. No reason for it to keep going. Successfully processed it through, and we're done. All right, so let's actually take the timestamp and go look at our SQL trace and see what we can learn. So 11/21/52. So let's pop this open. 11/21/52 is where we'll go. Just got past it. Let's see, right around here. Okay, now, one thing that we're looking for, let me remind you of this log entry. Right, so one of the things we're looking for that looks suspicious, notice this entry. Only SMS client and machine is not an SMS client. Sorry, only SMS clients are supported machine is not an SMS client. We have this number 159 here. Well, that looks really suspicious. And based on the history of seeing logging entries like this, that certainly looks like a machine ID. But this is very odd because it's kind of a low number compared to what we would have expected in the customer environment. And the machine that we're looking at in the customer environment is not this ID. In fact, you see right here, this is the machine ID in the customer environment. This does not match up. So that's weird. So what I want to do is figure out, is this in fact a machine ID or is this a static entry? I think it's a machine ID, and I think that might be the cause of our problem. But I need to know for sure. So to know for sure, I can actually go search my my log for the machine ID in question, which is 231. Right, so here's 16777-231. So I'll just search for that. So let me go back up to this time frame. And I'll search for that. okay, and see what we get. So let's see. Interesting. So this is the machine ID. It's the exact one that I would care about, and I can actually see that this happened right at the same time frame when the other entry happened in the log. So this actually must be the query that is being run to tell, is this machine a client or is it not? In other words, is it a valid machine in our database or is it not? And in fact, this is the query that is being run. And the way that I took it further to prove that is if you look in the code, it's exactly the query that the code is calling out to run whenever we're trying to validate whether the machine is a client. So I've got it here, right? And the other thing that I can know is the machine ID is in fact the item key of the box. So if I looked in the code, I saw where in those parentheses it is the item key that's being passed into the query. So what I know from that is, and you don't have to have source code access to be able to validate that. I just wanted to take it to the next level. This should give you a decent clue that this query is what we're running. And what I did is I took this query and I ran it in the customer environment, but instead of this number, I substituted the 159 value, right? And in fact, I got no hits back because there is no client in the database with an entry of 159. So now I understand that this entry that is being run in this log, or written in this log that says it's not a client, absolutely right. It's not a client. It's not coming back from that query. Well, now I'm left with a dilemma. Why in the world do we have an entry of 159 that we're looking for whenever the actual machine is here? And further, what do I do to continue to troubleshoot it? Well, I thought I was going to have to go and ask for a little bit more help on the debug level, but one thing I noticed in this case was looking at, let me go to the table, looking at, oh, what am I doing? I should stay here, SQL. Looking at this table, net machine policies. In my customer's environment, they actually had an entry of 159. But they didn't have it over in the system_disk table. So, kind of just out of lack of anything else to try, and also knowing that there was a disconnect here between the entry in the machine policies table and the fact there was no corresponding machine entry in the system_disk table, I just went ahead and cleaned up this entry. Right? Well, as soon as I did that, everything started processing through. About 20 minutes of processing later, the customer was now able to see every single machine variable policy was being retrieved. All the imaging was working fine, and it was all because we had an orphan entry, which led me then to wonder, why did we have an orphan entry? Well, in the customer's case, after we found this, they told me that they had run into some disk space issues and replication issues as a result of that, and so who knows what caused it? But in this case, it was caused solely, looks like, by having an orphaned entry in this table. Again, so admittedly, this is an obscure issue. Maybe it will help someone that has something similar down the road, right? But admittedly, this is an obscure issue. But I think the value in this kind of demonstration is showing how you would go about troubleshooting some of these issues that are really obscure, that maybe you don't have any other references as to how people have solved them and that kind of thing. So this is a couple of day process for me to get through all this, but it was certainly interesting, and I hope you found this presentation interesting as well.